On the morning of February 23, 2025, the waters off northern Queensland were bright under the sun, a steady breeze carrying the scent of salt and warmth across the shallow reef channels. And surfers dotted the waves, boards glinting as they cut through the turquoise swell. Among them was 27-year-old Liam Carter, an experienced local surfer with sun-bleached hair and lean muscles honed from years riding the Coral Sea. Alongside his friends, each enjoying the rare calm of the late summer morning, the group had gathered near a reef known for abundant fish and occasional shark sightings, the water clear enough to see shadows moving beneath but shallow enough to tempt playful antics. Liam, in a mischievous mood, decided to pull a prank, grabbing a small mesh bag of chum and slowly trailing it just behind the board of his friend, 25-year-old Jake Reynolds, laughing at the thought of the harmless scare that would surely follow. No one imagined that the prank would spiral into a violent fight for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable predators. At first, the prank seemed harmless, a thin trail of blood and fish bits drifting on the current, attracting curious fish and the occasional large shadow beneath the surface. Friends laughed and paddled closer to see the reaction, teasing Liam and Jake, unaware that the shimmer of chum in the sunlit water had drawn the attention of a massive tiger shark patrolling the area, a 13-foot adult male, its body sleek and muscular, mottled with dark stripes that ran along the golden-gray skin, eyes black and unyielding as it tracked the scent. The shark rose with sudden explosive speed, water erupting around its head, and before anyone could react, it slammed into Jake's board with a deafening impact that sent foam and spray in all directions. The board twisted violently beneath him, and in the same motion, the shark's jaws clamped onto his right calf with terrifying precision, teeth sinking deep, the pain immediate and searing as the icy water filled his mouth and lungs with shock. He was pulled downward, limbs flailing in instinctive resistance, the currents and the predator's strength dragging him beneath the surface in a chaotic tumble of spray and terror. Liam, who had been just meters away, paddled frantically toward his friend, his arms slicing through the water as adrenaline surged, heart hammering in his chest, eyes locked on the predator that circled with deliberate, threatening movements, each pass of its powerful tail creating waves that knocked him off balance. The tiger shark lunged again, jaws snapping inches from Liam's outstretched arms, the sound of teeth colliding with fiberglass and water echoing through the turmoil of the surf, a violent blur of motion and chaos that left both men reeling in shock and pain. The water churned with white foam and red streaks, punctuated by the desperate splashes of limbs and boards as friends attempted to intervene, pounding the surface with paddles, waving arms, and anything that could create enough disturbance to draw the shark's attention away, each second stretching endlessly. The sky bright above contrasting with the darkness of the ocean below, where danger lurked unseen. Jake struggled to keep his head above the surface, blood streaming down his leg, searing through the cold water and into his consciousness, as fear and pain mixed into an overwhelming, disorienting haze. Each breath was a battle, lungs burning while he kicked violently, trying to reach floating debris and his board, which had been torn and partially crushed by the shark's initial strikes. The predator struck twice more, raking its teeth across the board and water with terrifying precision, sending sprays of blood and foam into the air, forcing Jake to twist, dodge, and kick frantically in a desperate dance of survival, muscles screaming and energy waning with every movement. Around him, friends continued to create chaos, pounding water with paddles, shouting and splashing in an attempt to break the predator's focus, a coordinated yet frantic effort to buy time, to distract the apex predator long enough for the injured man to escape the deadly circle forming in the warm, shallow waves. Finally, after what felt like endless minutes, the tiger shark, perhaps deciding the effort was no longer worth the risk or frustrated by the unrelenting human resistance, veered away, disappearing beneath the surface in a cloud of stirred sand and silvery fish, leaving behind a scarred tableau of floating boards, churning red water, and a lone survivor clinging to debris, shaking violently from shock, cold, and the adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. Liam and other friends scrambled to reach him, hauling him onto a partially intact section of board, inspecting the deep lacerations that covered his calf, ankle, and foot, the flesh torn and bleeding profusely, each movement causing waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm him. But survival instinct held firm as he focused on staying afloat, keeping his breathing steady despite the terror and trauma of the attack. Emergency services arrived within minutes after a nearby observer had radioed for help, paramedics wading into the water to lift Jake onto a rescue vessel, wrapping him in thermal blankets and applying immediate first aid to staunch the bleeding while calming him as best they could amid the chaos of adrenaline and shock. Onlookers described the attack as a violent blur of teeth and chaos, a brutal reminder of the ocean's power and the deadly consequences of curiosity and provocation, even in waters frequented by humans for sport and leisure. The incident served as a sobering warning about the unpredictability of apex predators and the razor-thin line between play and life-threatening danger. The consequences of human impulsiveness colliding with natural aggression in a vivid, unforgettable confrontation that left permanent marks on both body and memory. Authorities later emphasized that tiger sharks, while generally solitary and opportunistic feeders, could respond aggressively when attracted by chum or blood, particularly during summer months when prey was abundant, and that even small playful gestures could provoke fatal outcomes. Surfers and guides across the region reassessed safety protocols, understanding anew the importance of respecting both the strength and instinct of the ocean's predators. For Jake, the memory of teeth, the roar of water, and the violent pull of the sea lingered long after rescue, a visceral imprint of a near-death struggle that had transformed a simple prank into an enduring lesson on the lethal consequences of human recklessness amid the raw power of nature. In the late morning of August 14, 2022, the sun hung high over the Santa Barbara coastline, casting a sparkling shimmer across the rolling waves that lapped against the sandy shore and rocky outcroppings. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the ocean beyond the break was dotted with jet skis, paddleboarders, and swimmers enjoying the summer warmth. Among the recreational visitors was 29-year-old Brandon Hayes, an experienced jet skier known for his daring stunts and precise control, who had chosen a stretch of water near a baited area frequented by pelagic fish. His goal was simple: to push the limits of speed, launching off waves with precision, soaring high for fleeting bursts of exhilaration before crashing back onto the restless sea. The morning began as any other, water sparkling under the sun, spray flaring from his board as he raced over the swells, each jump sending him higher and faster, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he pushed the boundaries of thrill and control. Brandon had executed a few successful jumps when he noticed a faint ripple below the surface, a subtle shadow that moved unnaturally beneath the glittering water. Moments later, the shadow became a blur of motion, a predator coiled and ready to strike. Without warning, a 10-foot shortfin mako exploded from the depths, launching itself through the air with astonishing speed and force, colliding with Brandon's jet ski in a deafening crash of fiberglass and spray. The impact sent him tumbling violently into the surf, the world spinning as he collided with the icy water, lungs filling with shock and salt. His limbs flailed instinctively, hands gripping the water as the predator circled, tail thrashing and jaws snapping just inches from his arms, teeth glinting as they passed dangerously close. Foam erupted around him, waves smashing and spinning him in every direction, the rush of the attack overwhelming every sense with its raw intensity. A violent ballet of water, teeth, and fear that transformed a recreational stunt into a life-threatening ordeal in an instant. Brandon fought to regain control, kicking toward his jet ski, which had partially righted itself but now bobbed like a broken toy amid the chaos. Water splashing over the board with each lunge of the mako, which attacked repeatedly, testing the limits of both predator and prey. He reached for the handlebars, but the shark's speed was unmatched. Its sleek body cut through the water with precision, each strike faster and more violent than the last, teeth grazing his leg and shoulder as he struggled to maintain his grip. Spray and foam obscured vision, adrenaline and fear locked every nerve in overdrive, and the violent oscillation of waves combined with the predator's repeated assaults made every second feel infinite, as if the ocean itself had become an arena for a brutal duel of survival. Lifelong experience on the water offered only partial defense. Instinct, strength, and training were pitted against raw, unrelenting predatory power, and even the simplest movements required perfect timing and awareness to avoid further injury. Minutes passed, though they stretched like hours in Brandon's perception, every moment defined by rapid decisions and frantic action. The shark struck at floating debris, snapping teeth through foam and spray, sometimes missing entirely but leaving arcs of red and white in its wake. Brandon twisted, turned, and kicked with precision born of repeated experience, desperately maneuvering through waves that threatened to pin him down or push him into shallow rocks. His hands grazed the handles of the jet ski, the fiberglass scraping against wet skin as the mako's attention returned repeatedly to the floating vehicle, each strike driving him deeper into adrenaline and terror, the roar of the ocean drowned only by the pulsing awareness of the predator circling, ready to erupt again with speed, force, and lethal intent. Finally, the sound of sirens and the sight of approaching lifeguards brought a sliver of hope amid the chaos. their boats cutting through the waves as they directed loud shouts and splashes to distract the shark. Brandon seized the moment, kicking with desperate energy to reach the lifeguard vessel, clinging to the side as trained personnel waded into the surf, extending arms and ropes to haul him aboard, wrapping him in blankets and stabilizing his condition. Bleeding from shallow lacerations across his leg and shoulder, bruised and shaken, he gasped for air, body trembling violently from shock and exertion, the adrenaline slowly giving way to awareness of what had just occurred. Around him, water churned with foam and remnants of the jet ski, and the shark had finally departed, slipping back into deeper channels, leaving behind only the violent imprint of its brief, terrifying dominance. Witnesses along the beach recounted the scene with disbelief, describing the attack as an intense blur of motion and sound, teeth snapping within inches of Brandon's hands, waves smashing in chaotic succession, and the predator's speed and aggression transforming a controlled stunt into a life-or-death struggle that left bystanders speechless. Lifeguards emphasized the unpredictability of short-fin makos, noting that their combination of speed, power, and aerial capability made them particularly dangerous when provoked or attracted by baited areas, even inadvertently. The incident became a sobering lesson for recreational water enthusiasts, illustrating the razor-thin line between daring performance and mortal risk, the raw reality of apex predators, and the consequences of pushing limits in waters where humans are guests rather than masters. In the aftermath, local authorities issued reminders about the dangers of extreme stunts near areas frequented by predatory fish, particularly near baited zones intended for fishing or observation. Brandon recovered physically within weeks, though the psychological scars lingered longer. The vivid memory of teeth flashing, water exploding, and waves smashing, embedding a lasting understanding of the fragile balance between thrill-seeking and survival. Friends and family noted the intensity of his account, the precise recollection of every strike, every splash, and the unrelenting power of the predator that had transformed a sunny morning into a near-fatal encounter. The chaotic, violent moments became a stark reminder that, even with skill, experience, and preparation, the ocean retains its power to surprise, dominate, and enforce its own rules in the most immediate and visceral ways. On the afternoon of March 18, 2024, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, were restless under a gray sky streaked with gusty wind, the Atlantic waves churning in restless currents that reflected both the sun's pale light and the underlying danger lurking beneath. A luxury yacht, the Ocean Dream, glided carefully over the choppy water, its polished hull cutting through swells as passengers leaned over railings and photographed the rolling sea, excited by the drama of the open ocean. Among them was 12-year-old Ethan Meyer, a boy with sun-streaked hair, wide green eyes, and a curiosity that made him restless near the water's edge, leaning too far in his eagerness to capture the perfect shot. The yacht had slowed, the captain reducing speed to steady the vessel in the uneven swell so the passengers could pose and snap pictures. The wind whipped at their hair, the Atlantic spray stinging faces, and the yacht pitched gently with each rolling wave, creating the illusion of control in waters that were anything but predictable. In a single catastrophic instant, a wave rose higher than anticipated, striking the deck with violent force. Ethan, momentarily unbalanced, lost his footing, arms flailing as he tumbled over the side, plunging into the icy water below. The Atlantic was shockingly cold, wrapping his body in an immediate searing chill that stole his breath and numbed his limbs. Within seconds, a shadow emerged beneath him, a massive presence moving with deliberate and predatory intent. A 15-foot great white rose explosively, drawn by the frantic splashing, thrashing, and sudden movement of a young body in its hunting grounds. The shark struck with terrifying precision, jaws clamping onto Ethan's leg, pulling him downward with bone-crushing force, twisting his body beneath the waves as panic surged through the boy's lungs and muscles. Salt water and fear filled his mouth as he kicked violently, desperate to escape. But the predator's strength and instinct left him nearly powerless in the icy, swirling current. Chaos erupted on the deck of the yacht as crew members scrambled, hands grabbing flotation devices and life rings, voices shouting warnings and encouragement over the roar of wind and surf. Captain Willem van der Merwe leaned over the railing, eyes wide with terror, gripping a rope as he directed others to act quickly, knowing that even seconds could make the difference between life and death. Other passengers shouted in panic, some frozen in disbelief while trained crew hurled devices into the water, trying to create distance between the boy and the shark. But the predator was relentless, circling with deliberate, menacing movements, snapping jaws mere inches from Ethan's arms each time he stretched toward a float or piece of debris. Foam and spray churned violently around him, red streaks spreading through the water as blood and bubbles mingled, the ocean transforming into a chaotic battlefield where raw power and survival instincts collided in a frenzy of teeth, water, and flailing limbs. Ethan's limbs burned with exertion and cold, adrenaline pumping through every fiber of his body as he twisted and kicked to keep his head above water. The shark lunged again, jaws raking his leg, tearing through neoprene and flesh alike, each strike leaving him weakened yet still desperate to survive. His small hands grasped at the nearest flotation ring, then at debris floating from the yacht, the current spinning him with each movement as the great white's shadow flickered beneath him, moving with terrifying speed. Time seemed distorted, seconds stretching into eternity, each heartbeat a loud drum in his ears as the predator circled, the power of its muscles propelling it with relentless efficiency, its black eyes fixed on him as if calculating every reaction, every desperate flail, and responding instantly with instinctual aggression. The crew on the yacht acted with rapid coordination, throwing ropes, reaching over the railing, and pounding the water with poles to distract the predator, creating chaos that finally diverted its attention momentarily. This brief hesitation allowed lifeguards from a nearby rescue boat to arrive, cutting through the waves and spraying seawater across the deck as they maneuvered to Ethan's position. Harnesses were lowered and trained arms grabbed him, pulling him from the frigid water with frantic urgency, his body shaking violently from cold, shock, and the lingering grip of terror. Deep lacerations ran across his leg and calf, bloodied and raw, while scrapes and bruises covered his arms from flailing against both water and debris. Every movement hurt, yet the relief of being lifted from the predator's reach provided a fleeting but essential moment of clarity amid the adrenaline and lingering fear. Once aboard the rescue vessel, medics assessed his injuries, applying pressure to deep cuts and wrapping him in thermal blankets to counteract hypothermia. His eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the trauma of the moments spent underwater, the stark memory of teeth snapping within inches of his hands, the violent thrashing of the predator, and the sensation of being utterly powerless in the face of raw, predatory power. Captain van der Merwe and crew members, still soaked and exhausted, recounted their frantic efforts to maintain distance between the boy and the shark, throwing devices and shouting commands, actions that had proved critical in preventing a fatal outcome. The entire episode, lasting barely 2 minutes, left a profound impact on all who witnessed it, a chilling reminder of the speed, strength, and unpredictability of great whites in their natural environment. Authorities who investigated the incident noted the unusual aggressiveness of great whites in the area that week, likely drawn by abundant prey and stirred by the unpredictable currents and splashes from passing vessels. Experts emphasized that even brief exposure to such apex predators could result in life-threatening situations, highlighting the importance of vigilant supervision, preparedness, and respect for the power of the ocean. The incident became a case study in both the limitations of human reaction and the extraordinary capabilities of great whites, illustrating how quickly ordinary recreational activity could escalate into a violent, near-fatal confrontation. Ethan's survival was attributed to rapid crew response, flotation devices, and a measure of luck in a scenario where instincts, power, and timing converge with terrifying speed. On August 12, 2025, the sun was setting over the calm waters near Savusavu, Fiji. Tessa Langley, a 28-year-old student studying ocean science, was getting ready for another dive. She had spent years learning about marine animals and coral habitats. Her love for the ocean began as a child, when she would collect shells on the beach near her hometown. Now she was focused on studying fish patterns in deep reef areas. Tessa was not new to the water. She had trained hard, practiced breath control, and understood the dangers that could appear on the open sea. Her dives were part of a long project for her school. That evening, she wanted to explore a rocky reef before the light disappeared. Tessa entered the sea with smooth, slow movements. Her breathing was calm, her body relaxed. The sky above turned orange and pink as the light faded. She moved deeper into the blue, where fish darted between coral walls. Strong water currents made it hard to stay steady. The reef below was quiet and dark, and she floated alone, writing notes on her small underwater pad. Around her, the water looked empty. But in the shadows, something large moved closer. Without a sound, a hammerhead shark rushed toward her. It came fast from the side. The wide head and tall dorsal fin cut through the water. Tessa did not see it until it hit her. The impact knocked her hard. Sharp teeth closed on her upper leg. The pain was sudden. Her wetsuit tore and her muscles burned. Bubbles shot around her as she twisted and turned, trying to get away. She kicked and hit with her arms, each move sending streaks of red into the sea. The water grew thick with blood. The shark let go, confused by the cloud. Tessa did not wait. She swam upward, her lungs burning. Every stroke felt harder. The surface looked far. Her body ached. She kept going, fighting through the darkness and pushing toward the light. Behind her, the shark circled but did not strike again. It stayed close, swimming in wide loops, while Tessa climbed higher through the deep blue. Her hands broke the surface at last. She gasped for air. Her leg throbbed, deep cuts spilling blood into the sea around her. Dive workers on a nearby boat saw her and rushed over. They helped her out of the water and laid her down. Her suit was ripped and her skin was scratched and bruised. The shark had left deep marks across her thigh, but her spirit stayed strong. Tessa held onto the side of the boat, eyes wide, chest rising fast. Around her, the sea looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But those minutes had changed everything. The ocean had shown a new face, wild, sharp, and fast. Her dive had started with science and curiosity. It ended with pain and fear, and the night was just beginning. Tessa lay on the deck as the boat raced toward the shore. Her head rested on a towel, and her eyes stared at the fading sky. The pain in her leg grew with each wave that rocked the boat. The injury was deep, and blood soaked through the fabric wrapped around it. One of the local dive helpers held her hand while another used his phone to call for urgent care. Though her mind was cloudy, she stayed awake, knowing she had to reach land before she lost too much strength. As they neared the coast, lights from the small clinic began to shine through the trees. A group of medics waited on the dock, ready with a stretcher. The helpers lifted Tessa from the boat and passed her carefully into their arms. Her face was pale, her breathing fast. Inside the treatment room, nurses cleaned the torn skin and stopped the bleeding. The wound stretched across her thigh with ugly marks. Some of the muscle was torn. She needed many stitches and strong medicine to stop the pain. After a long time, her pulse returned to normal. News of the event spread quickly. The dive guides were shocked. Most of them had worked in the area for years but had never seen anything like it. Hammerhead sharks were known to swim close to reefs, but attacks on swimmers were rare. People said the low light and fast water might have confused the animal. They said maybe the shark thought Tessa was something else, or that it felt surprised and reacted with force. No one could say for sure, but many divers began to speak about being more careful at dusk. Tessa had to rest for weeks. Her school helped her take time away from her studies. She stayed in a small room near the sea where she could hear waves at night. The wound healed slowly. A large scar formed across her leg. She walked with care at first. The bite had changed her body, but not her heart. Her notes from that dive were lost, but the memory stayed clear in her mind. She often looked out at the reef from a bench on the hill, thinking about the strike and how fast it happened. Doctors said she was lucky. The shark had missed important veins and bones. If it had held on longer, the harm could have been worse. Some said she had stayed too long in the water, but others called her brave for surviving. Her story spread in the diving world. It served as a reminder that the ocean holds both beauty and danger. Later that year, signs were placed near the reef warning about low visibility times. New safety rules were shared with tourists, and though many returned to the water, few forgot the night when shadows moved too fast. Tessa did not stop loving the sea, but she now looked at it with new eyes, full of care, wonder, and deep respect. May 29, 2025. The sun had just started rising over the Indian Ocean as Marcus Bell prepared for another long shift offshore. At 42 years old, Marcus was known as one of the most careful and skilled oil rig workers in his crew. Born and raised in Perth, he had spent most of his adult life working along Australia's remote coastlines. With years of training and experience behind him, he was trusted with complex underwater tasks, often dealing with equipment bolted deep below the surface. Marcus enjoyed quiet days spent checking support beams and pipe connections under the rig. Though the work was tough, he liked the sense of purpose it gave him. Safety was always the top priority, and every dive was planned with care. That morning, Marcus was assigned to inspect a few steel frames that held up part of the platform. The weather was steady, but strong underwater currents had been noted by the shift manager. Wearing a harness and carrying tools, Marcus moved toward the rig's edge and began his slow climb down to the service area near the lower beams. He had done this dozens of times before, always following every safety rule. But this time, something went wrong. A loose bracket holding his lifeline snapped without warning. In 1 second, his footing slipped, and Marcus plunged straight into the swirling sea below. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. His hard hat floated away as waves spun him toward the edge of the rig. In those deeper waters, a large tiger shark had been moving slowly, hunting for scraps or smaller fish near the structure's base. The loud splash and kicking movement caught the shark's attention instantly. It reacted fast, cutting through the water with sharp turns. Before Marcus could recover from the fall, he felt a crushing grip around his right leg. The shark's teeth tore through his protective suit and dug into skin and bone. The force yanked him sideways and slammed him against one of the thick beams underwater. Workers above shouted as they spotted blood rising through the blue. Sirens sounded and lifebuoys were tossed. Safety ropes were lowered, swinging through the air as crew members tried to reach him. But the predator was strong and relentless. It twisted its body, dragging Marcus farther, smacking him again into the metal bars. His arms flailed, trying to push away, but the sea pulled harder. After what felt like forever, the animal let go. Maybe the rope scared it, maybe the noise confused it, but it turned away, fading back into the darker parts of the sea. Marcus floated, badly hurt, surrounded by red water. His co-workers acted fast, pulling him back toward the surface. The rig's crane lifted his body slowly out of the ocean. One man held his head to keep it steady. A call for air rescue had already been made. High above, a helicopter began its approach. The fight to save him had only just begun. As the chopper lowered its rescue basket toward the oil platform, the crew held Marcus steady. His body was weak, covered in bruises and blood. His leg had deep holes and twisted bones. Wrapping him in thick blankets, they placed him inside the harness. The wind from the blades made everything harder, but the workers moved fast, pushing past fear and shock. Once secure, the team signaled up, and the basket rose quickly into the sky. Within minutes, the aircraft disappeared into the clouds, heading straight for the nearest trauma center. At the hospital, doctors were already waiting. The injuries were severe. Large wounds marked both sides of his limb, and the skin had torn in many places. Surgeons worked for hours, stopping the bleeding and repairing the broken areas. Metal rods were used to hold the leg together. Tubes were added to help him breathe and get medicine. Nurses moved quickly between machines, checking his heart and watching for problems. After the long procedure, he was moved to a quiet room to rest. Back on the platform, the crew was silent. No one could forget what had happened. Red stains remained on the edge of the deck. Tools lay scattered where people had dropped them while trying to help. The site manager ordered all diving work to pause until more safety checks were made. A warning was sent to nearby rigs about the presence of dangerous wildlife in the area. Some workers called their families. Others just sat alone, thinking about how fast life could change. Marcus stayed in the hospital for several weeks. Every day, doctors checked the healing. He could not walk and needed strong medicine to ease the pain. Therapists visited, helping him move small parts of his body again. His family came often, sitting beside him and bringing comfort. The company covered all the costs, offering extra help for his recovery. Specialists explained that it would take months before he could move on his own again. Some damage might never heal fully. News of the incident spread. Reports told of the rare event, describing how even trained workers faced real risk near wild places. Experts said the animal likely came close due to the smell and movement near the rig. Many people were surprised to learn that such large creatures swam so near human structures. Officials suggested stronger rules and better gear for future workers. After some time, Marcus began to speak again. His voice was soft, and his eyes told of fear and memory. He remembered the sharp turn, the weight of the bite, and the cold of the deep. He also remembered hands reaching for him, ropes pulling, and faces full of worry. His journey would be long, but he had survived. The sea that had almost taken his life would remain in his thoughts forever. For him and his team, the lesson was clear. Nature's power could not be ignored, not even for 1 second. On June 4, 2025, the waters off Guanacaste, Costa Rica, shimmered under bright sunlight, drawing travelers and locals alike to enjoy the warm Pacific swells. Among them was 27-year-old Marco Silva, a young man known for his energy and love for outdoor sports. Born and raised in San Jose, he had always been drawn to the coast whenever time allowed. His childhood was filled with surfing lessons, beach soccer, and weekend trips with his family. As he grew older, his passion for speed and watercraft deepened, making jet skiing his favorite escape from everyday life. To him, the open sea meant freedom, and the roar of the engine under him felt like a call to adventure. On this particular day, Marco had traveled with a group of close friends to Guanacaste, a place famous for its golden shores and lively waves. The group rented jet skis and took turns racing across the water, pushing each other to test new tricks. Marco, always eager to prove himself, pushed the limits more than anyone else. He sped across the chop, leaning hard into turns, lifting high off the crests, and laughing as sprays of water trailed behind. The others admired his skill, though they also worried that his daring stunts might one day push him too far. As the sun climbed higher, Marco attempted a sharper maneuver than before. He cut across the waves at an angle, leaning too far as the jet ski bounced violently on the uneven surface. The force threw him off balance, and within seconds he was hurled into the sea. His friends slowed their machines, circling back toward him, at first expecting nothing more than a laugh as he climbed back aboard. Yet the splash of his fall carried farther than anyone realized, sending vibrations through the water that reached into the depths below. Unseen in the shadows, a 10-foot short-fin mako had been moving through the currents. The predator had been drawn to the area by schools of baitfish, their silver bodies darting just beneath the surface. The sudden turbulence from Marco's fall caught the shark's attention. Its sleek body accelerated with terrifying speed, rising through the blue water with unmatched power. Marco, treading water and catching his breath, had no warning before the predator struck. In a burst of force, the mako lunged at his leg, its jaws grazing across his calf and thigh. The impact shredded fabric and tore into his muscle, leaving him stunned by searing pain. His cry was swallowed by the crashing waves. The shark's violent thrashing churned the sea around him, pulling him under for moments at a time. Marco fought to stay afloat, gasping for air as panic set in. He flailed his arms, desperate to keep his head above water while the dark shape circled back. Its jaws snapped again, this time cutting close to his hand as he tried to push it away. Each second stretched endlessly, his body weakening, while the predator showed no signs of retreat. On the nearby jet skis, his friends shouted and waved, desperate to draw the animal's attention. The sea, once playful, had become a battleground where survival hung by the thinnest thread. The circle of the predator tightened as Marco's body weakened, but the shouts and frantic motions from his companions began to shift the chaos. They slapped the water and waved their arms, splashing to pull the creature's focus away. The sleek shadow darted near the surface before veering aside, giving Marco a brief opening to claw toward the jet ski that floated only a few feet away. Each stroke sent sharp pain through his leg, but instinct forced him forward. Blood trailed behind, swirling in the churning sea, marking every movement like a beacon in the water. With great effort, he managed to grip the edge of the jet ski. His arms trembled as he tried to lift himself, the loss of strength nearly pulling him back into the ocean. His friends leaned down, reaching out to steady him, pulling until his battered body slid across the seat. The machine rocked under the sudden weight, but relief spread among the group as Marco was finally out of the water. Behind them, the mako lingered for a moment, circling once more before vanishing into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. The waves grew calm again, but the horror of what had just happened remained etched in every face. Blood poured from his wounds, soaking the surface beneath him. Torn fabric clung to the deep gashes across his thigh and calf, and each pulse of pain reminded him how close he had come to losing his life. The group acted quickly, pressing towels and shirts against the injuries to slow the bleeding. Calls for help were sent through emergency radios, and the crew of a nearby boat responded, racing to their location. Within minutes, Marco was transferred onto a larger vessel where first aid continued as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The sight of bandages stained red and the sound of worried voices filled the deck as the boat cut through the waves toward shore. Upon arrival, a helicopter waited at the dock, blades chopping the air as rescuers carried Marco on a stretcher. He was lifted aboard and flown to the nearest hospital, the coastline shrinking below. The medical team worked tirelessly, stabilizing him during the flight. Hours later, surgeons operated to repair the torn muscle and seal the jagged lacerations. Though the attack had left severe damage, his survival was nothing short of remarkable. His friends, shaken and silent, waited in the hospital corridors until news arrived that his condition was stable. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. Authorities reminded the public how even skilled swimmers and riders face danger when entering environments where apex predators roam. Experts explained how splashing and sudden noise often draw fast-moving hunters, making situations like Marco's nearly impossible to predict. For him, the memory of sharp teeth and cold eyes in the water would never fade, a constant reminder of how fragile human life can be against the power of the ocean. The experience turned a carefree day of fun into a lesson carved deep into flesh and memory, showing once again how quickly calm seas can turn into a fight for survival. March 12, 2024, the frozen world of Svalbard, Norway, lay beneath a pale Arctic sky. Ice sheets stretched across the horizon, and the frigid waters below hid mysteries few had ever seen. Among the small group of explorers working in the region was Erik Johansson, a 34-year-old diver from Oslo. From a young age, Erik had shown a fascination with the sea. He spent his childhood exploring fjords and later pursued a career in marine biology at university. Over the years, his passion grew into a career, combining research with filming projects that brought the hidden life of the deep to a wider audience. By 2024, Erik was well respected in the diving community for his work in extreme environments. He had completed expeditions in the North Atlantic, the Barents Sea, and even beneath Antarctic ice. Known for his calm nature and careful planning, he was trusted to handle conditions that few others could endure. The Svalbard mission was part of a documentary project aimed at capturing rare marine life in one of the world's most remote ecosystems. That morning, Erik prepared carefully. He donned a thick, dry suit, double gloves, and multiple layers of insulation to withstand water temperatures that hovered near freezing. His breathing gear was checked numerous times, and the camera rig was secured to his chest. With each careful step, he lowered himself into the icy water, bubbles rising around him as he sank below the surface. Visibility was poor, the dim Arctic light barely reaching beneath the layers of ice. The seafloor appeared only in patches, a mix of ridges and rocky outcrops. Erik moved slowly, his camera capturing drifting jellyfish and small fish darting between the shadows. The silence of the deep surrounded him, broken only by the steady sound of his breathing. Then, from the darker blue beneath him, a shape began to take form. At first, it was only a shadow, broad and slow, but as it drew closer, its size became clear. A Greenland shark, estimated at nearly 15 feet in length, emerged from the depths. Its massive body moved with deliberate slowness, its pale eyes fixed on the diver. Known to live for centuries, these predators were rare to encounter and rarely aggressive. However, their size alone made them a formidable threat. Erik's pulse quickened as the shark began to circle, its presence commanding the entire space around him. The enormous creature brushed close, its rough skin grazing against his flippers. The current from its body pushed him sideways, sending his camera rig knocking against the rocks. Erik steadied himself, careful not to make sudden movements that might draw further attention. Still, the shark pressed closer, nudging him toward a rocky ridge. The sensation of its mass, the sheer power hidden in its slow motion, filled him with dread. Every instinct urged him to flee, but he held steady, kicking gently as he began backing toward shallower water. The shark turned again, its massive head passing only feet away from his body. The giant form lingered, circling with steady precision. Its tail swept in wide arcs, stirring the cold water into heavy currents that rocked Erik against the ridge. He pressed his fins carefully, keeping his distance while every second stretched into eternity. The predator's movements were slow but purposeful, each pass closer than the last. Its blunt snout brushed the edge of his camera rig again, forcing him to adjust and hold balance. The diver's heart pounded inside his chest, his breath echoing loudly in his ears. He knew that any sudden strike could crush him instantly, yet he also understood that panic could worsen the danger. He pushed gently away from the rocks, inching toward the lighter blue above. The shark followed, tilting slightly as though curious, its pale eyes fixed on him. For a moment, its vast body blocked all sight of the open water, its sheer size overwhelming the narrow channel of visibility. Another pass carried it close enough for its rough skin to scrape the edge of his fin. The sensation jolted him, reminding him how little stood between survival and disaster. He steadied himself, careful to keep movements deliberate, edging toward the brighter shallows. The massive shape curved again, but this time it began to sink, drifting downward with unhurried ease. Its shadow stretched long across the rocks before fading into the darker water below. Erik remained still for several moments, scanning the depths, half expecting the form to rise again. When the shadow did not return, he began a slow, cautious ascent. Each kick was measured, careful not to disturb the water too much. At last, the surface shimmered above, and he broke through the icy layer, gasping as cold air filled his lungs. His team hauled him back aboard the support vessel, his body trembling not from the temperature alone but from the weight of what he had just endured. On deck, the encounter sank in. The camera rig still carried marks where the predator had brushed against it, a stark reminder of how close the moment had come. Though physically unharmed, Erik's hands shook as he removed his gloves, his face pale from the shock. In the days that followed, experts reviewed his footage. They confirmed the estimate of a 15-foot Greenland shark, an animal rarely seen by divers at such proximity. While generally passive, scientists explained that their behavior can turn unpredictable. Their size, power, and natural curiosity make them capable of causing harm, even without exhibiting overt aggression. In the deep Arctic waters, encounters like this remain rare, but they highlight the risks associated with exploring such isolated regions. The aftermath left Eric deeply reflective. Although he continued his work, he often spoke of the fine line between research and danger, between admiration and survival. For him, the ice-cold waters of Svalbard would forever carry the memory of the massive creature that circled him in silence, testing the fragile balance between man and predator. On October 14, 2022, the winds swept across the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, a place renowned worldwide as the center of great white shark tourism. That morning, a group of tourists and professionals gathered for a cage diving expedition, eager to experience the power of these predators up close. Among them was Daniel Fischer, a 35-year-old professional diver from Hamburg, Germany. Daniel had built a career in underwater photography, traveling to the world's oceans to capture rare images of marine life. His work had been published in magazines and featured in documentaries, earning him recognition for his fearless approach and technical skill. Daniel had always been drawn to sharks. From his teenage years, he studied them extensively, fascinated by their biology and misunderstood reputation. His goal was to capture images that showed both their beauty and their danger. For him, Gansbai was a dream location, offering one of the highest chances of close encounters with great whites. With years of experience in deep-sea diving, coral reef exploration, and wreck diving, Daniel was confident in his ability to work safely, even in the presence of apex predators. That morning, the expedition set out in choppy seas. The crew secured the steel cage, lowering it carefully over the side of the boat. The divers prepared their gear, pulling on wetsuits, checking regulators, and readying cameras. Excitement mixed with nerves as they watched the water churn below. The area had a reputation for unpredictable encounters, but that was exactly what drew people like Daniel to it. Within minutes of the cage being secured, a massive shadow appeared beneath the surface. Rising with a surge of water, a 17-foot great white shark circled the vessel. Its dorsal fin sliced through the swell, its body twisting with powerful strokes as it approached the cage. The divers inside felt the thrill of the moment, gripping the bars and pointing their cameras at the scene. Daniel leaned out farther than the others, determined to get a close-up shot of the predator's eyes and teeth. His camera extended beyond the bars, dangling just inches from the open water. Focused on the shot, he distracted himself from the rules designed to keep divers safe. As the great white circled faster, its movements grew sharper, its body brushing close to the cage. Without warning, the predator lunged. Its massive jaws clamped onto Daniel's arm, the force bending steel and splintering metal. The cage shook violently as bubbles and blood burst into the water. Divers inside screamed through their regulators as the structure groaned under the attack. Daniel struggled, thrashing as the shark pulled with crushing strength, dragging him against the bars. Crew members on deck scrambled to raise the cage, ropes straining as the winch groaned. But the predator surged again, striking the cage with its full weight. The impact twisted the bars wider, tearing Daniel from his hold. The great white's force ripped Daniel free of the bars, pulling him downward into the swirling water. The cage swung violently, banging against the hull of the boat as the predator thrashed with its grip, locked tight. The water filled with foam and red clouds that spread quickly, blinding those still inside the cage. Divers pressed against the steel, their eyes wide as the scene unfolded before them in chaos. The shark surged again, dragging its prey deeper with terrifying speed. The crew above shouted warnings and pounded the surface with poles, trying to break the predator's focus. Metal clanged against metal as the winch hauled the cage upward, but the attack continued below. Within moments, Daniel's form was lost in the churn, his body spinning as the shark twisted in brutal arcs. The struggle lasted barely 2 minutes, yet every second seemed to stretch endlessly for those who watched. The predator finally released its grip, vanishing into the gloom with a flick of its massive tail. Daniel floated briefly before sinking beyond reach, the current pulling him away. Silence fell across the boat, broken only by the crash of waves against the hull and the hiss of regulators as the remaining divers surfaced in shock. The cage was pulled back aboard, its bars bent and warped from the force of the assault. Equipment hung twisted, cameras lost to the depths. The deck, usually buzzing with excitement after an encounter, stood frozen in horror. The survivors clutched the railings, their faces pale as they stared at the slick of blood spreading across the waves. Authorities were notified immediately, and patrol vessels were dispatched to search the surrounding area. Divers were ordered out of the water, and the trip was abandoned. Rescue efforts scoured the seas, but nothing more was found. By the time officials confirmed the details, it was clear the diver had not survived. The incident shook the Gansbai community. Cage diving was a major industry, drawing tourists from around the globe. Yet the event revealed the razor-thin line between controlled encounters and the raw danger of wild predators. Experts reviewed the footage and accounts, noting unusually aggressive behavior in the days leading up to the attack. They explained that strong currents, reduced prey, and seasonal changes could all increase risk. Out of respect for the loss, authorities suspended all cage diving tours in the area. Operators faced scrutiny, with questions raised about safety protocols and the positioning of divers. Many pointed to the importance of never leaning outside the bars, a rule designed to prevent exactly what had occurred. Daniel's decision to push for the perfect shot had cost him his life, leaving colleagues and loved ones devastated. For those who had been present, the memory of the steel bending, the screams beneath the surface, and the blood in the water would never fade. The ocean had claimed another life, reminding everyone that in the territory of the Great White, even the strongest cage could not guarantee safety. On August 12, 2025, the bright summer sun hung over the Algarve coast of Portugal, casting a golden light across the calm Atlantic waters. Tourists filled the beaches, but farther out, thrill-seekers tested themselves against the sea. Among them was Adrian Costa, a 26-year-old athlete known to his friends for his daring nature and love of extreme water sports. Born in Lisbon, Adrian had spent his childhood near the ocean, learning to surf, dive, and handle boats before most of his peers. His adventurous spirit led him into kneeboarding, a sport that combined the speed of a motorboat with the balance and agility of board riding. For him, it was not just a pastime, but a way to challenge limits and capture moments of adrenaline. Adrian was no stranger to risk. After completing his studies in marine biology, he dedicated a significant portion of his time to exploring ocean ecosystems. His knowledge of the sea only deepened his respect for it. Yet he believed that calculated risks brought him closer to the raw forces of nature. The Algarve was his favorite location, where clear skies and blue waters gave the perfect stage for pushing his skills further. That morning, Adrian set out with a group of friends who shared his passion for the subject. They rented a small speedboat and prepared their boards, joking and cheering as they took turns performing tricks near floating buoys. The sea was calm, a deceptive stillness hiding what lay below. When his turn came, Adrian tightened his grip on the tow rope and balanced on his kneeboard, ready to perform daring spins across the surface. As the boat accelerated, the board skimmed gracefully, cutting across ripples with speed. Adrian leaned into turns, lifting sprays of salt water into the air. He performed spins near the markers, pushing closer each time, drawing cheers from the spectators on the boat. For him, the water was alive beneath his board, a place of energy and control. But under the surface, unseen, something else was drawn to the vibrations and splashes. From the depths, a shadow approached with alarming speed. A 10-foot shortfin mako shark, one of the fastest predators in the ocean, surged upward. The moment was sudden and brutal. Its jaws clamped hard onto Adrian's lower leg, tearing through wetsuit and skin with terrifying force. The impact sent him crashing off the board, his body slamming into the water as the rope slipped from his grasp. Adrian thrashed violently, the shock of pain mixing with panic as red streaks swirled around him. His heart pounded as he kicked wildly, trying to break free from the predator's grip. The board floated nearby, rocking uselessly in the disturbed water. The shark released him but did not retreat. It circled aggressively, snapping at the board, and at every splash, its speed slicing through the waves. On the boat, his friends screamed and splashed with paddles, trying to distract the predator. Their frantic movements echoed across the sea, buying precious moments as Adrian fought to stay afloat. Every second stretched into an eternity, the fin slicing closer each time it turned. The shark's circles tightened as it darted back toward the flailing rider, snapping at the board and slicing through the red-tinted foam. Adrian's body ached. His leg was torn and weak, but survival forced him to kick hard and reach for the floating board. His fingers gripped its edge as the predator rushed past again, its powerful body cutting a wake that rocked him violently. Each pass brought the animal closer, its jaws opening wide before closing with a thunderous snap that echoed through the water. The small speedboat maneuvered quickly, its engine roaring as it cut across the waves toward him. The crew pounded the surface with paddles, sending noise and splashes across the area. The predator twisted away for an instant, distracted by the racket, before turning back with renewed focus. Adrian clung desperately to the board, pulling himself halfway on as his arms shook from exhaustion. Blood continued to flow from his leg, clouding the water around him and fueling the animal's persistence. The shark struck again, ramming the board and nearly flipping it. Adrian was thrown sideways, his body half submerged as he scrambled to hold on. The predator bit into the board's edge, tearing away foam and plastic, its teeth leaving deep grooves as fragments floated to the surface. With each snap, the situation grew more dire, and his strength faded. In a final coordinated effort, the boat crew edged close enough for two riders to reach out. One splashed furiously with a rope, while another extended a pole, striking the water near the fin. The predator spun, startled by the sudden noise, its body twisting away with a powerful flick of its tail. In that brief moment, Adrian was pulled across the side of the vessel, collapsing onto the deck with a heavy thud. His face was pale, his chest heaving with ragged breaths as seawater streamed from his wetsuit. The group pressed cloth against his leg, the deep lacerations gaping and swollen. Bruises covered his body from the struggle, and blood continued to seep through makeshift bandages. The boat sped back toward the coast, its bow cutting clean lines across the sea as the dorsal fin disappeared behind them. Relief washed over the group, but silence lingered, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Adrian's shallow breathing. At the marina, medical crews rushed him into an ambulance. Surgeons later confirmed multiple deep cuts along his lower leg, with muscle damage but no loss of bone. His survival was credited to the fast reaction of his companions and the distraction efforts that kept the predator from striking again. The wounds required surgery and months of rehabilitation, but he was alive. News of the attack spread across the Algarve, shocking both locals and visitors. Experts explained that short-fin makos are among the fastest sharks, capable of bursts of speed that make sudden encounters particularly dangerous. They are drawn to rapid movement and unusual splashing, behaviors common in water sports like kneeboarding. For Adrian, the experience left more than scars. His passion for the ocean remained, but the memory of teeth tearing through the board and the helplessness of floating in bloodied water followed him long after his body healed. The encounter became a reminder that the sea, however beautiful, holds dangers that demand respect from even the most skilled riders. The pristine waters surrounding the coral formations near Queensland, Australia, had long served as a backdrop for high-end fashion photography. On October 5, 2021, these same crystal-clear depths would become the site of one of the most tragic underwater modeling incidents in recent history. The area, renowned for its exceptional visibility extending beyond 60 meters, attracted photographers from around the globe seeking to capture ethereal underwater imagery. Maya Collins, a 26-year-old fashion model from Brisbane, had built her career on specialized underwater shoots. Her ability to hold her breath for extended periods and move gracefully while submerged made her highly sought after in the niche market of aquatic fashion photography. The project that brought her to these remote waters was an ambitious collaboration with renowned photographer Sebastian Hartwell and his assistant team of 5 experienced divers. Hartwell had spent months planning the shoot, which involved capturing Collins in flowing designer gowns that would create dramatic silhouettes against the coral backdrop. The concept required Collins to descend to approximately 20 feet below the surface, where the interplay of natural light and fabric movement would create the desired artistic effect. Safety protocols included multiple dive masters, emergency oxygen supplies, and constant communication via underwater hand signals. The morning conditions appeared ideal for their ambitious project. Water temperature held steady at 26 degrees Celsius, with minimal current and exceptional visibility. Collins had completed her safety briefing and equipment check, wearing a specially designed weighted belt that would allow her to achieve neutral buoyancy while maintaining graceful movement in the flowing gowns. The first series of shots proceeded flawlessly. Collins descended gracefully, her emerald silk dress billowing around her like liquid mercury. Hartwell positioned himself 15 feet away, his underwater camera housing capturing the interplay of sunlight filtering through the fabric. The assistant divers maintained their positions around the perimeter, monitoring both Collins and the surrounding water for any potential hazards. 23 minutes into the session, Collins was preparing for her most challenging pose. The sequence required her to suspend herself horizontally at 20 feet depth, arms extended upward toward the surface, while the gown's fabric created an otherworldly silhouette. Hartwell had calculated the lighting angles precisely, and the entire team held their positions to capture what they anticipated would be the signature image of the collection. The tiger shark approached from the deeper water beyond the coral formation, drawn by the unusual activity and surface splashing from the support boat above. Measuring approximately 13 feet in length, The predator moved with the calculated precision of an apex hunter that had survived decades in these waters. Its distinctive striped pattern remained partially camouflaged against the shifting light patterns filtering down from the surface. Collins was fully focused on maintaining her pose when the attack occurred. The shark struck with devastating speed, its powerful jaws clamping around her legs with crushing force. The impact sent shockwaves through the water as Collins was violently yanked from her suspended position. Her carefully controlled breathing technique immediately collapsed as panic and pain overwhelmed her system. Hartwell and his dive team witnessed the attack unfold in horrifying slow motion. The photographer immediately dropped his camera equipment and swam toward Collins, while his assistants began striking their dive tanks with metal objects to create noise and distraction. The metallic clanging echoed through the water as the team deployed every deterrent technique they had trained for. The tiger shark's thrashing intensified as it dragged Collins deeper toward the coral formation. Her flowing gown, which had created such beautiful imagery moments before, now tangled around both predator and victim. The silk fabric restricted Collins' movements while potentially confusing the shark's sensory systems. Two of the dive masters reached the attack site and began striking the shark with their diving knives and camera equipment. The predator's hide proved remarkably resistant to their desperate attempts at intervention. Collins disappeared beneath the shark's bulk as it continued its characteristic side-to-side thrashing motion. After nearly 90 seconds of chaos, the tiger shark released its grip and retreated toward deeper water. The dive team immediately surrounded Collins, but her injuries proved catastrophic. Despite their advanced training and immediate response, the combination of massive trauma and prolonged submersion had proven fatal. The emergency ascent and surface rescue procedures were executed flawlessly, but Collins was pronounced dead upon reaching the support vessel. The entire attack had been inadvertently captured on Hartwell's underwater cameras, providing marine biologists with unprecedented footage of tiger shark predatory behavior in shallow reef environments. Australian authorities later confirmed unusually high tiger shark activity throughout the region that month. Marine biologists theorized that changing water temperatures and abundant fish populations had drawn larger predators into areas typically considered safe for diving activities. The incident prompted immediate changes to underwater photography safety protocols, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and the presence of armed dive masters during all commercial shoots in open water environments. Hartwell discontinued underwater fashion photography following the tragedy, while Collins's family established a foundation promoting water safety education. The incident remains one of the most documented fatal shark attacks in Australian waters, serving as a sobering reminder that even controlled professional environments cannot eliminate the inherent risks of entering the ocean's domain. On the morning of August 24, 2025, the fjords near Tromsø, Norway, were shrouded in a thin mist, the air crisp with the sharp bite of late summer Arctic chill, and the sea stretching in deep glassy channels framed by towering cliffs that reflected the soft gray of the sky. 10 tourists, bundled in life jackets and heavy coats against the wind, boarded a small, rigid-hulled boat built for whale watching. The vessel bobbed gently as they settled in, excitement sparking at the chance to see orcas in the wild. Among the passengers were 2 Germans, Matthias and Lena Richter, a French couple, Julien and Claire Dubois, 4 Italians, Marco, Sofia, Luca, and Elena Bianchi, and 2 Spaniards, Javier and Rosa Morales, each carrying cameras and phones, eager to capture fleeting glimpses of the black and white giants of the fjord. The boat's operator, a seasoned local named Henrik Olsen, maneuvered the vessel carefully through narrow passages, pointing out signs of whales and explaining the seasonal migration patterns of the herring that often drew orcas into the area. The tourists leaned over the railing, scanning the water with binoculars and cameras, murmurs of anticipation filling the cool air, as Henrik guided them toward a pod spotted just beyond a bend in the fjord, the dorsal fins slicing through the surface at irregular intervals. The group's excitement swelled as the boat slowed to a cautious drift, the tourists whispering among themselves, marveling at the size and grace of the orcas, noting the glossy black skin and striking white patches behind the eyes, unaware of the latent danger beneath the water's placid surface. The pod seemed calm. A few calves were swimming close to their mothers. Henrik's eyes were trained on the largest male, a massive adult whose fin towered above the rest, casting a shadow across the rippling sea. Suddenly, without warning, the largest male surged from below, water spraying violently as it collided with the boat with a force that sent a shudder through the hull. Henrik shouted, bracing himself against the wheel. But the orca's next strike was harder, swinging its massive body and slamming into the starboard side, a deafening crash that splintered the fiberglass and sent tourists tumbling over the railing, screams cut short by the icy water. Panic erupted as the orca's momentum propelled the boat into a near-complete roll, the vessel rocking violently, then tipping further as the massive animal struck again, the impact sending a shockwave through the passengers' bodies, leaving them stunned, cold and disoriented in the frigid Arctic waters, the chill seizing their limbs almost instantly. Life jackets provided some buoyancy, but the shock of the temperature and the violent thrashing of the sea made it difficult to keep heads above water, as strong currents tugged at arms and legs, spinning the tourists away from the wreckage that floated among broken pieces of the hull. 7 of the 10 tourists lost their lives in the chaos, all within just 3 minutes. Matthias Richter clung to a railing fragment before the orca struck again, the sudden surge throwing him against the wreckage with crushing force, his body disappearing beneath the spray. His wife Lena tried to reach him, but the current dragged her into the path of the orca's fluke, the blow breaking her ribs and driving her under before she surfaced only once, gasping in agony before vanishing for good. Julien and Claire Dubois were pulled down together when a violent whirlpool formed around the animal's twisting body, the couple's life jackets useless against the undertow as bubbles and flailing arms marked their final struggle. Marco Bianchi was struck directly when the orca rammed a floating section of hull, the impact smashing the debris into his chest and forcing the air from his lungs as he slipped beneath the waves. Luca tried to swim toward his sisters but was dragged backward, exhaustion overwhelming him until his movements slowed and the cold silenced him beneath the gray surface. Javier Morales, panicked and thrashing, swallowed mouthfuls of seawater while the currents battered him against splintered wreckage, his cries drowned by the roar of the sea until he, too, went still. 3 passengers, however, managed to find fragments of the boat that held their weight, the twisted metal and floating sections providing temporary refuge from the frigid water. Sofia Bianchi, with arms wrapped around a large piece of the railing, kept her legs moving constantly to avoid hypothermia, shivering violently, but managing to breathe in short, controlled gasps while scanning the swirling water for any sign of rescue. Elena clung to a small bench that had broken free while Rosa Morales managed to keep hold of an overturned section of the hull, her fingers numb, nails scraping against the fiberglass as waves threatened to dislodge her. Each knew the danger of prolonged exposure, the cold turning from painful to life-threatening within minutes, and their minds raced between fear, survival instinct, and the incomprehensible force of the animal that had destroyed their excursion and claimed so many lives within moments. Minutes stretched like hours as the orca, perhaps satisfied or simply uninterested once the boat was broken and most passengers separated, retreated beneath the surface, leaving the fjord eerily quiet except for the splashing of struggling survivors and the distant cries carried by the wind along the cliffs. Rescue helicopters, alerted by Henrik's brief distress call before being thrown from the wheel, arrived swiftly, lowering baskets to pluck the 3 survivors from the icy water, each wrapped in thermal blankets, and rushed to shore, teeth chattering and bodies trembling, hearts pounding from both shock and relief. The bodies of 7 tourists were recovered and brought to the fjord's edge, the tragedy laying bare the lethal combination of natural curiosity, human vulnerability, and the unpredictable strength of a wild predator in its own environment. Investigators who examined the incident attributed the attack to unusually aggressive orca behavior, noting that the late summer migration of herring could incite heightened territorial or feeding instincts among males, particularly dominant adults. Authorities immediately suspended all tourist excursions in the fjords, issuing warnings for small vessels and emphasizing the danger posed by wildlife that could not be fully anticipated or controlled. Locals and guides spoke in hushed tones about the power of the Arctic Sea and its predators, reminding one another that even creatures often regarded as gentle or intelligent could, in certain circumstances, become devastatingly lethal, leaving a permanent mark on those who witnessed the events and the families of those who did not survive. On the morning of November 12, 2016, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, shimmered under a pale spring sun, the surface rippling gently over the kelp-strewn seabed, a place long renowned for great white sharks drawn to the dense population of seals and the labyrinth of underwater forests that provided both shelter and hunting grounds. 6 professional divers, assembled for a documentary project, prepared their gear meticulously aboard a small research vessel, checking regulators, oxygen tanks, and cameras that would capture intimate behaviors of the apex predators. Among them was 31-year-old Marco Jensen, a veteran of numerous deep-sea expeditions whose calm, methodical demeanor belied the tension that accompanies any dive into waters dominated by creatures capable of striking with lethal force in an instant. Alongside him were 5 colleagues, each equally experienced and aware of the risks, yet driven by the rare opportunity to observe and film great whites in the wild. Their anticipation mingled with professional caution as the boat drifted over the kelp forest anchored at a site chosen for its high density of marine activity. 30 minutes into the dive, the team adjusted their positions along a reinforced platform designed to float just below the surface. The divers' cameras angled to capture the undulating shadows among the kelp fronds. The water was clear, visibility unusually good for Gansby, allowing the divers to track schools of fish and occasional seals darting through the tangle of kelp. Marco, scanning the water with a practiced eye, noticed a massive shadow moving with deliberate stealth beneath the forest, a presence that seemed disproportionate to any ordinary fish or seal. Before he could signal a warning, the shadow surged upward, a towering, sleek body breaking through the water with explosive force as a 16-foot great white lunged, ramming the platform with a violence that sent shockwaves through the metal structure and through every diver's chest. Panic erupted immediately, bubbles spouting from regulators as the divers struggled to maintain orientation, flailing limbs slicing through water while the predator circled, assessing the intrusion and striking again with targeted precision. The shark's attacks were swift, powerful, and terrifyingly accurate, its immense jaws snapping near exposed arms and legs, tearing through neoprene and flesh with a force that defied anticipation. Marco instinctively tried to shield a colleague, pushing against the current and the predator's momentum, but the orifice of its mouth passed within inches of his hands, powerful muscles flexing as it recoiled and lunged once more. Screams were muffled by regulators, but the terror was visible in every movement, flailing arms, sudden evasions, and desperate kicks as the divers attempted to evade the predator's repeated assaults. Within 5 minutes, 3 of the divers had sustained fatal injuries. The shark targeting areas left vulnerable during the chaos, and their bodies were torn and drifting, carried by currents that twisted through the kelp forest, disappearing into shadowed recesses while the remaining 3 struggled desperately to stay upright, lungs burning, heart pounding, as adrenaline surged through every fiber of their being. Cameras mounted on the platform captured the full horror of the attack, bubbles streaming upward in frantic spirals, limbs flailing in attempts to dodge powerful strikes, and the massive silhouette of the shark passing repeatedly, black and white body a blur against the greenish water of the kelp forest. Marco fought to maintain focus, eyes scanning for any advantage, hands gripping equipment to prevent drifting too far from the platform while simultaneously trying to avoid the predator's snapping jaws. Each breath through the regulator became a conscious effort, timing inhalations with evasive maneuvers as the shark circled with patient aggression, calculating its next strike. The ocean seemed to close in, the dense forest of kelp twisting and writhing as if alive itself, reflecting the chaos above and below, making escape routes less predictable, and heightening the sense of confinement and danger for the divers who had thought themselves prepared for any eventuality. The 3 surviving divers managed to reach the surface only after what felt like endless moments of pure terror, kicking and clawing at the water with exhausted limbs, the platform partially broken and spinning as currents shifted. They clung to pieces of equipment and floating cameras, shivering violently from the cold and adrenaline, watching in disbelief as the predator, after a series of final strikes that left a scarred pattern on the remaining platform, retreated into the depths, leaving behind a trail of bubbles, churned water, and the bodies of their fallen colleagues. Once aboard the research vessel, paramedics and local authorities attended to the survivors, wrapping them in thermal blankets and administering first aid, though their injuries were minor compared to the physical and psychological trauma they had endured. Their accounts described the experience as pure terror, emphasizing the impossibility of preparing for the raw, overwhelming power of a great white, determined to assert dominance over intruders in its hunting grounds. Investigations confirmed an unusual spike in aggressive great white activity in Gansby during that week, possibly linked to a dense concentration of prey that had drawn multiple adult sharks into territorial overlap. Authorities issued warnings to other divers, emphasizing extreme caution and limiting underwater filming in areas known for apex predator activity, stressing that even the most experienced professionals are vulnerable in the presence of a fully grown great white acting with instinctive force. The surviving divers recounted in detail the sensation of being trapped within the shark's sphere of influence, the speed and accuracy of its strikes, and the overwhelming sense of power radiating from the predator as it lunged with terrifying precision, noting that experience, training, and calm nerves offered only partial protection against a creature evolved to dominate the sea. The incident became a chilling reminder to marine professionals and enthusiasts alike that the ocean, however familiar or scientifically studied, remained a domain ruled by creatures whose strength, instincts, and unpredictability could turn a routine expedition into a nightmare within moments. Even in waters as well charted and frequented as Gansby, where divers and researchers routinely enter the realm of apex predators, the encounter demonstrated the razor-thin margin between observation and catastrophe, between admiration and mortal danger, leaving an indelible imprint on those who survived, and a permanent record of the lethal potential of the great whites that roam the South African coastline, their presence a silent, ever-present warning in the deep blue. In the early hours of November 16, 2023, the turquoise waters of the Bahamas darkened ominously as a tropical storm surged unexpectedly across the archipelago, sending wind and rain whipping through the rigging of small fishing vessels scattered across the offshore waters. 60 miles from the nearest island, the fishing boat Sea Venture, a modest vessel built for coastal and near offshore work, pitched violently with every swell, the crew of 4 struggling to maintain footing on the slick, heaving deck. Nets full of freshly caught fish threatened to spill with each monstrous wave, lines snapping and ropes whipping under the combined force of wind and water. The storm came without warning, a sudden wall of gray and green, twisting the horizon and throwing the boat into a relentless rhythm of pitch and roll that made even the simplest task a precarious gamble between survival and disaster. The men, hardened fishermen accustomed to unpredictable seas, clung to rails and ropes, voices nearly lost to the roar of wind and waves, each second a battle against the elements. As the boat lurched sharply to starboard, scattering nets and coils of rope, a darker presence moved beneath the churning surface, drawn to the scent of bait and the disturbance of the storm. A 10-foot oceanic whitetip circled just beneath the deck, its long, rounded fins slicing through the frothy waves with deliberate, predatory grace. The shark's eyes, black and unyielding, tracked the movement of the crew, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, with explosive speed, the predator lunged upward, jaws opening to reveal rows of sharp, serrated teeth, snapping at a dangling arm and tearing into the nets with terrifying efficiency. A spray of seawater and shredded line erupted across the deck, slamming into the fishermen and tossing them like ragdolls as adrenaline surged, hearts hammering, instincts screaming to react before the shark struck again. The boat shuddered under the assault, the wooden hull creaking and groaning as if protesting against the assault from both nature and predator, every wave carrying with it the threat of capsizing or worse. Fernando Castillo, a 38-year-old fisherman with a lifetime at sea, lunged to push the shark away from the frantically snapping nets, but a violent bite grazed his forearm, flesh torn and blood spilling into the spray-laden deck. Pain seared through him and his grip faltered for a split second, almost enough for the predator to capitalize on the opening. Splashes erupted around him as the oceanic whitetip circled again, its movement swift and precise, cutting through the storm-churned water with incredible power, snapping at anything that moved or hung within reach of its jaws. The crew responded with instinctive force, slamming long poles against the hull, hitting the shark with repeated strikes intended more to intimidate than to injure. But each hit was met with the shark's relentless persistence, drawing its attention back to dangling limbs, torn nets, and the chaotic turmoil of the vessel caught between predator and storm. Waves crashed over the deck, seawater mixing with blood, salt, and iron tang burning their mouths and noses. Yet there was no room to retreat. The boat pitched and rolled violently, and losing balance could mean falling into the teeth of the shark or being swept overboard by the storm's fury. Minutes stretched like hours as the small vessel endured the dual onslaught of nature and predator, the crew locked in a desperate dance of survival, shouting, striking, and bracing against the pitching deck. Lines whipped across faces, rain-stung eyes, and every swing of the poles or frantic shove of the shark created further chaos. Yet it was necessary to maintain a fragile perimeter between human and predator. One wave struck with such force that a bundle of nets slid across the deck, nearly knocking Fernando to the wet surface, his injured arm a raw reminder of the stakes. The shark lunged once more, teeth snapping just inches from another crewman's leg, the sound of water and impact deafening in the tumult. And yet the fishermen refused to relent, slamming, bashing, and yelling, channeling every ounce of fear and strength into holding their ground against a predator that had turned their storm-ridden fishing day into a life-or-death ordeal. Eventually, after several tense minutes that seemed endless, the oceanic white-tip retreated, disappearing beneath the foam and spray, the storm masking its departure as the vessel heaved with every towering wave. The crew, soaked to the bone, shivering violently and bloodied from minor injuries, leaned heavily against rails and ropes, gasping for air, minds racing to comprehend the narrow escape. Fernando's arm throbbed painfully, a deep gash reminding him that even small errors or hesitation could have proven fatal, and the others inspected minor cuts and bruises, all grateful for survival, yet shaken to their core. The storm continued to rage, but the predator no longer loitered, leaving the fishermen to navigate the remaining miles to calmer waters, with a heightened awareness of both the power of the sea and the lethality of its inhabitants. In the aftermath, local authorities and coast guards noted the incident as a rare but dangerous interaction, emphasizing that oceanic whitetips, while not the most frequently encountered species, could display aggressive behavior when provoked, attracted to blood or bait, or when sea conditions created high turbulence that disoriented prey and humans alike. Witnesses later recounted the attack with awe and disbelief, describing the raw intensity of splashing water, snapping teeth, flying nets, and the terrifying precision of a predator, able to exploit chaos with deadly efficiency. The incident became a cautionary tale for fishermen and recreational water users alike, highlighting the fragile balance between human activity and the unpredictable, untamed forces of the open ocean, and leaving the crew of Sea Venture with an indelible memory of adrenaline, fear, and the power of a hunter perfectly adapted to its environment. Even hours later, as calmer waters were approached, each crewman recounted the sequence in vivid detail. Teeth closing just short of limbs, waves smashing across the deck, and the shark's relentless presence creating a suffocating atmosphere of tension. The story would travel through the local fishing communities, retold as an example of vigilance, respect for the ocean, and the unpredictable danger lurking in even familiar waters. A stark reminder that survival depends on readiness, courage, and a measure of luck in the presence of nature's apex hunters. On July 17, 2025, 27-year-old Chloe Vandermeer prepared for what she thought would be a calm, underwater session off the coast of Namibia. She had been diving for many years, known among ocean lovers online for sharing peaceful clips from deep-sea explorations. She had grown up near the coast of New Zealand, where her interest in marine life began. Over time, this interest became her daily life. Chloe was also very good with underwater cameras and often posted live videos from her dives, showing fish, sunken ships, and coral reefs to her followers. Her experience and calm nature made her feel comfortable in places where others felt fear. That day she had planned to film around a quiet shipwreck, which sat deep under the waves, surrounded by thick water full of drifting sand and cloudy currents. The sunken cargo ship rested far below the surface, tilted to one side with its broken steel parts now home to sea creatures. The sea was rough that day, and strong currents pushed through the wreckage. Visibility was very poor. Chloe was not alone in the water. Her dive partner stayed nearby but out of frame, keeping an eye out for safety. Despite the swirling water and low light, she began streaming live from her waterproof camera, slowly moving over the wreck, pointing the lens at small fish and rusted metal. As she floated gently over the seabed, the shape came out of nowhere. A massive great white shark, nearly 14 feet long, shot forward from the side of the wreck like a missile. It struck her thigh with full force. The sharp teeth sank deep through her wetsuit, tearing muscle and puncturing deep into flesh. The shark's body twisted with power, its tail slamming against parts of the ship, sending waves of motion through the water. Chloe was tossed by the force, her leg pouring blood into the sea, making the cloudy water turn red. In shock, but still aware, Chloe swung her camera case hard at the shark. She knew it was her only chance to keep it away. At the same time, her dive partner moved fast, using fins and noise to make the shark turn its head. The loud splashes and sudden movement gave Chloe the few seconds she needed. She kicked away from the wreck, rising toward the light far above, her hands still gripping the broken camera rig. The surface felt farther than usual, but she made it. Once above water, rescue began quickly. A call went out, and within minutes, a medical helicopter arrived. Chloe was rushed to the nearest hospital for emergency help. Her wounds were serious, deep cuts and holes in her leg, but she survived. Later, the video was removed from all websites because of how graphic and upsetting it was. The event served as a sharp reminder that even skilled divers, with all their planning and tools, are still small in the world of predators that move through the sea unseen. The emergency helicopter flew fast across the sky, its blades cutting through the wind as it carried Chloe to the closest hospital. Inside, doctors and nurses waited with stretchers and supplies. Her leg was wrapped tightly to stop the bleeding, but the wounds were still bad. The medical team worked quickly, moving her into a clean room where machines beeped softly and bright lights shone above. She needed stitches, bandages, and strong medicine to keep her from feeling pain. The doctors cleaned the bite area and checked for damage to her muscles and bones. The deep holes in her leg were clear signs of the power behind the shark's jaws. As she rested, news of the livestream began to spread online. Many people had watched it live, their screens filled with bubbles, flashes of movement, and the sudden appearance of the great white. The footage was clear enough to show blood in the water and the panic that followed. Viewers were shocked and frightened. They started sharing the video in different places, and soon it was all over the internet. People who had never watched diving streams before were now talking about the attack. Some felt scared, others felt sad. A few felt angry that such a dangerous dive had been shown live. Very quickly, video websites took down the recording. The pictures were too graphic. There were cries for better rules around live streaming from dangerous places. Experts explained that sharks do not attack people often, but this event showed how fast things can go wrong. Ocean safety became a big topic. Diving groups began sharing tips and warnings. Some even paused their trips near shipwrecks to check if the areas were safe. Chloe's story made many people think twice before getting into the water with only a camera and a wetsuit. Chloe stayed in the hospital for days. Her body healed slowly, but her thoughts were still full of the event. She remembered the moment the shark came out of the wreck. She remembered the sharp pain and the noise under the water. She thought of her dive buddy who helped save her life. Even after the wounds began to close, the memory stayed sharp. Doctors said her leg would recover, but she would need rest, therapy, and time away from diving. Her fans sent messages, flowers, and drawings to wish her well. Some wrote letters about how brave she was. Others said her video made them respect the sea more than ever before. Outside the hospital, the sky stayed clear and warm, but Chloe knew she would not return to the water soon. The ocean had given her many calm dives, but now it had shown her something wild and true. People still talked about the stream. They remembered the speed of the shark and the fear in the deep water. Even though the video was gone, the image stayed in their minds. The sea remained wide and deep, holding secrets and dangers in its quiet blue shadows. On April 12, 2025, the sea off Gansbai moved with quiet waves under the soft light of early evening. A private yacht floated on the blue water, holding a small group of travelers. Among them was 35-year-old Oliver Strauss, a businessman known for his calm voice and love for ocean trips. His wife, 33-year-old Leela, sat nearby. She was gentle and thoughtful, often quiet in crowds. The couple had been married for 6 years. They lived in Cape Town but liked to escape to peaceful waters when life grew tense. On this day, they had invited a few friends to join them for a break, away from the city noise. The boat had food and music. Some sat in the back, chatting softly. Others leaned on the rail, looking for sea life. Lila stood near the edge, watching the waves. The wind carried sounds between her and Oliver, who had begun to raise his voice. Their talk grew sharp. No one heard exactly what was said, but people turned when they saw sudden movement. Without warning, Oliver pushed Lila off the boat. Her body hit the water with a loud splash. The area was known for large marine creatures. Fast-moving currents carried strong scents across the sea. Lila splashed and tried to float, but the waves pulled at her. Beneath the surface, a massive shape moved. A great white shark almost 16 feet long had felt the vibrations. It rushed from the deep and struck quickly. Its jaws clamped around her leg and arm. The impact sent her spinning. The water turned red as she kicked and tried to twist free. The creature dove deeper, dragging her down. The people on the yacht shouted. Someone threw a rope, another tossed a life ring. A man even jumped halfway into the water holding a long stick. But the animal did not let go. It turned under the waves, still pulling her lower. Lila fought desperately, but the shark's strength was overwhelming. The sea swallowed them again and again, and each time she resurfaced, her strength seemed to fade. After a long and horrible struggle, the shark finally let go. Lila's body floated up, motionless. A lifeguard from a nearby support boat arrived. They pulled her out, her limbs torn and her skin pale. Blood soaked the towel wrapped around her. Her eyes were closed and her chest did not rise. A helicopter landed on a nearby platform. She was lifted on a stretcher and flown toward help. The ride was fast, but her injuries were too serious. Back on the yacht, everyone stood in silence. The music had stopped. The air had grown cold. Oliver sat alone, his hands shaking. The event had changed the night from peaceful to tragic in seconds. The boat turned toward the shore, its passengers lost in quiet fear, not knowing yet how the full story would unfold once they reached land. As the yacht approached the harbor, flashing lights met the group. Emergency workers moved quickly, preparing for the worst. The news of the sea incident had spread fast. At the hospital, doctors tried to fight against time. They worked in silence, knowing the odds were low. The body had lost too much. The damage was too wide. Within minutes, the efforts stopped. A voice confirmed what most feared. Lila could not be saved. The wounds had gone too deep. The pain was too great for her to return. Word reached the boat while it was still docking. People stood still, not speaking. Some cried quietly. A few held their heads in their hands. The air was heavy, filled with shock. What had begun as a peaceful sail now ended with grief. What followed was not calm. Officers waited at the pier. They looked at each guest, asking what they had seen. The focus quickly turned to Oliver. His hands shook again. He answered their questions, but doubt filled the space around him. Later, he sat alone in a small room, lights above his head, voices around him asking about the push. Each moment was looked at again. Each sound, each step, each glance at the boat was written down. The story started to take shape. Friends gave different versions. One said it looked like an accident. Another thought it seemed too fast to be a slip. Yet another believed the push came after sharp words. The mystery began to grow. News reporters arrived the next morning. Cameras filmed the water where it had happened. Images of the yacht filled the screens. Headlines spoke of danger, not only from sharks, but from human choices. People online shared strong thoughts. Some blamed carelessness. Others asked how such a place could become deadly. The story sparked wide discussion. Experts warned again about sea creatures in known hot zones. But this time it was not just about nature, it was also about trust between people. A few days later, a small group gathered on the shore to say goodbye. Flowers floated on the tide, moving slowly away. The sea that once brought peace now held sad memories. Lila's family stood close, holding hands, watching the waves. Back in the city, legal steps were underway, records were gathered, statements were printed. Questions about Oliver's role stayed loud. Was it a mistake? Was it done in anger? Did he think she would be safe? Only he knew the full answer, but many were now looking for the truth. What stayed in every heart was how fast things had changed. 1 second of action led to a loss. One sudden moment took a life. The ocean, wide and deep, had shown once again that it held power beyond control. And this time the pain it carried had come from above the surface, not just below. On July 4, 2025, Michael Rivera stood on the balcony of a luxury cruise ship sailing through the calm blue waters of the Caribbean Sea near Belize. He was on vacation with his wife Elena and their young son Diego, who had just finished 2nd grade. The family had planned this trip for months to celebrate a break from busy work schedules and school routines. Michael, a history teacher, loved spending time on the open water. Elena worked as a graphic designer and enjoyed the quiet views and warm weather. Diego was full of energy and excitement, always running from one end of the ship to the other, soaking in every moment of the adventure. That afternoon, the family had gathered on their private balcony after lunch, enjoying snacks and the distant view of the horizon. Without warning, a strong wave struck the ship's side. The force tilted the vessel just enough to cause chaos on the small balcony. Michael, who had been leaning on the railing, lost his balance. Elena tried to grab him, but as she moved forward, she slipped too. Diego, holding onto his mother's hand, was pulled along. All 3 members fell overboard into the open sea, their bodies slicing through the surface like heavy stones. Splashing, gasping, and twisting in the fast-moving current, they tried to stay afloat. The cruise ship crew and nearby guests heard the screams and splashes, quickly rushing to alert the safety team. Below the surface, unseen danger waited. A large bull shark had been swimming nearby, drawn by the motion and the disruption above. Within moments, the animal surged toward the struggling family. It moved with speed and strength, heading straight for Michael. Its jaws snapped down onto his leg with crushing power, tearing through flesh and muscle. Michael cried out in pain as red waves spread through the water. He kicked wildly, trying to get free from the animal's grip. Meanwhile, Elena fought the waves and looked for Diego, who was floating nearby on a foam life cushion. Another shark came close, bumping into the device before moving away. The water turned frantic with movement, foam, and cries for help. Passengers and crew tossed out rings and ropes from the deck. Elena caught one and held on tightly. She grabbed Diego and held him against her chest as they were pulled toward safety. Michael, still struggling, finally broke free from the shark's mouth when the animal released him. Blood poured from his wound, and he barely held onto a rope that was lowered toward him. With effort and teamwork, the safety crew pulled all three back onto the ship. As the family lay on the deck, surrounded by worried faces, the danger below had faded, but the shock in their eyes said everything. The calm sea had turned into a nightmare, and their peaceful cruise had changed forever. The deck of the ship became a scene of panic and urgency as crew members rushed to surround Michael. Blood pooled around his leg, soaking towels and clothing that passengers tried to press against the wound. His breathing was heavy, his face pale, and his body trembled from shock. Elena sat close by, holding Diego tightly, her own arms scratched and bruised from the fall. Though her cuts were minor, the look in her eyes showed fear far greater than pain. The boy, still gripping the float he had clung to in the water, shook as tears ran down his face. Passengers whispered in disbelief, still shaken by the sight of the predator circling below only moments earlier. Medical staff on board worked quickly. They applied pressure to the open gashes and wrapped bandages tightly around Michael's torn flesh. A stretcher was carried to the balcony area, and with help from several strong hands, Michael was lifted onto it. His wife and child followed as he was taken inside toward the ship's infirmary. Alarms had already been raised to request emergency evacuation, and a helicopter was arranged to meet the vessel at the nearest safe location. The once festive atmosphere of the cruise had shifted into silence, with many guests staring out at the sea, reminded of how fast a peaceful moment could change. Inside the medical bay, the injured man was monitored closely. Every wave of the ship caused fresh discomfort, and the staff kept adjusting his position to slow the flow of blood. His leg had deep lacerations and torn muscle, the damage so severe that only advanced treatment on land could save him from permanent loss of function. The family remained close, with Elena staying beside him, watching every movement of the doctors, while Diego sat in a corner wrapped in a blanket, still trying to understand what had happened. Time passed slowly as the sound of the helicopter grew louder outside. When the rescue team arrived, the patient was carefully transferred onto a hoist and lifted into the aircraft. Elena and Diego were brought up next, and within minutes, the helicopter carried them toward the nearest hospital. Back on the ship, passengers and crew spoke quietly about the incident, many replaying the moment in their minds when the three had vanished over the railing. The sense of safety they once felt at sea now seemed fragile, shaken by the sudden attack. Officials on board documented the event and contacted authorities, as every detail needed to be recorded. At the hospital, surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage caused by the powerful bite. Though the leg was saved, recovery would be long and painful. News of the accident spread quickly, drawing attention to the risks of open waters even near popular cruise routes. For Elena, the bruises and scratches would heal, but the memory of watching her husband pulled under by a predator would remain. For Diego, the images of the sea would never feel the same. What began as a joyful trip had turned into a reminder of how quickly danger can rise from the depths. On June 18, 2020, the chilly waters off Gansby, South Africa, stretched wide and restless under the morning sun. Known worldwide as one of the most active great white shark hotspots, the town was home to fishermen who had worked the waters for generations. Among them was Peter van der Merwe, a 42-year-old father of two. Born and raised in the Western Cape, Peter grew up on the coast, where his father had taught him the fishing trade from a young age. His life revolved around the sea, which provided both his livelihood and a sense of peace. Peter was known in the community as a patient and caring man who deeply cared for his children. He often brought them along on calmer trips, eager to pass down the same lessons he had once learned. His 11-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son loved these outings. For them, the small boat rides meant time with their father, stories of the sea, and the thrill of seeing what might come up on the end of a line. On this particular day, the three of them set out in the early hours, their small wooden vessel rocking gently as it left the harbor. The waters shimmered with life. Seabirds swooped above, and the children laughed as they helped their father prepare lines and bait. The calm atmosphere gave no sign of what would soon unfold. After some time, Peter leaned over the side of the vessel to reel in a struggling catch. The rod bent sharply, the line pulling tight. He braced himself, gripping the railing for support as the children watched with excitement. In an instant, the sea beneath them erupted. A massive 16-foot great white surged upward, its enormous jaws clamping down on Peter's leg. The sudden impact snapped the fishing line and splintered the wooden railing in a burst of force. The boat rocked violently, tossing gear and buckets across the deck. The children screamed as they stumbled, clutching the edge to keep from falling overboard. Peter thrashed, striking out with desperate kicks as the predator dragged him toward the water. His hands grasped the railing, his body twisting as he fought against the immense power pulling him down. Foam and spray filled the air as the shark thrashed, tugging him away from the boat. The sound of splintering wood and crashing water filled the children's ears as they clung tightly to the side, terror in their eyes. Nearby fishermen, hearing the commotion, rushed closer, splashing at the surface and jabbing long poles toward the predator. Their efforts struck the water in loud bursts, but the great white held firm. Minutes of chaos followed, the predator tearing at the water in brutal surges. Blood spread across the waves, mixing with the foam as the struggle raged on. The predator eventually retreated, slipping into deeper water, but by then the surface told a grim story. Peter resurfaced briefly, motionless, the ocean around him stained red. His children cried out from the boat, their young faces frozen in horror as they witnessed the final moments of their father's fight. The water calmed only slightly as the predator slipped back into the deep, leaving behind floating debris and a red trail that stained the waves. Peter's body drifted briefly on the surface before vanishing beneath the rolling swells. His children clung to the edge of the boat, their small hands trembling as the cries of panic still echoed across the open sea. The nearby fishermen maneuvered their vessel closer, pulling alongside the smaller craft to shield it from further danger. Several men reached over to steady the children, guiding them safely into their own boat. Their faces were pale and shocked, their eyes wide as they stared at the water where their father had disappeared. The ocean, which had always been a place of learning and joy for them, had, in moments, turned into a nightmare. The rescuers kept watch on the surface, holes ready in case the predator returned, but the dorsal fin no longer appeared. The silence that followed carried a heavy weight, broken only by the sobs of the children and the crash of waves against the hulls. The return to shore was filled with grief. The harbor, usually alive with activity, grew hushed as word of what had happened spread. Medical teams were waiting, but there was nothing more to be done. The children were taken quickly into care, wrapped in blankets, though the sun was still high. Their faces were marked by shock rather than cold. The fishing community gathered, their expressions somber, knowing they had lost one of their own in the most brutal manner. Authorities confirmed the details later that day. The strike had been sudden and violent, carried out by a great white estimated at 16 feet in length. It was one of several aggressive encounters reported that week along the same stretch of coast. Experts explained that the waters around Gansby were known for seasonal spikes in predator activity, as the migration of prey drew the sharks closer to shore. The warning came too late for Peter, whose trip with his children had ended in tragedy. The aftermath weighed heavily on those who had witnessed it. The fishermen who tried to drive the predator away spoke of how helpless they felt in the face of such power. They described the scene as one of the most terrifying moments of their lives, far worse than storms or accidents at sea. For the children, the trauma of watching their father taken remained sharp. Though physically unharmed, their young lives were forever altered. In the weeks that followed, tributes were held in the community. Friends and neighbors supported the children, ensuring they would be well cared for, despite their father's absence. The story spread beyond the small town, serving as a chilling reminder of the risks that come with life on the water. Even for those with generations of experience, the ocean held dangers that could not be controlled. The image of that day lingered long after the waves settled. It became a story told again and again, not just of loss, but of the brutal force of one of nature's deadliest predators. On June 5, 2025, the waters off Maui, Hawaii looked calm from the surface, but beneath them lay strong currents and poor visibility. That morning, a specialized police diving team prepared for an underwater recovery operation. Among them was Detective Mark Rivera, a 37-year-old officer with over a decade of service. Born and raised on Oahu, Mark had built his career in law enforcement, focusing on marine operations. He had been part of numerous underwater searches and rescues, earning a reputation for his calm demeanor under pressure and skill in challenging conditions. His colleagues trusted him deeply, and he often took the lead during high-risk dives. Mark had joined 4 other divers that day, all of whom were trained to handle recovery work in Hawaii's unpredictable waters. Their mission was to search for evidence connected to an ongoing investigation involving a sunken vessel. The job was demanding, requiring precision and endurance in challenging conditions. Equipped with wetsuits, regulators, and recovery tools, the men descended carefully, spreading out along the reef as they scanned the wreckage. The underwater environment was harsh. Currents tugged at their bodies, shifting sand clouds across the seabed. Visibility was poor, making every movement slow and deliberate. The divers communicated with hand signals, marking their progress as they worked. Mark moved steadily, examining the scattered debris while adjusting his buoyancy to avoid stirring up more silt. Despite the effort, the team felt confident in their ability to complete the operation. Then the mood changed. From the edge of the gloom, a massive shape approached. A tiger shark, close to 12 feet in length, drifted out of the darkness. Drawn by the vibrations of the tools and the unfamiliar activity on the reef, it circled with unsettling intent. The divers froze for a moment, watching as the predator's striped body twisted around them. The first strike came suddenly. The shark lunged forward, jaws clamping onto Mark's leg with crushing force. The pressure tore through the neoprene and blood immediately clouded the water. Mark screamed into his regulator, his body convulsing as bubbles erupted around him. His hands flailed against the predator's mass, but its thrashing dragged him sideways in violent bursts. His partner reacted quickly, jabbing hard with a recovery pole at the shark's flank. The impact startled it only briefly, as the predator twisted again, shaking Mark with terrifying power. Other divers joined in, creating noise by slamming tools against metal and stone as they were desperate to distract the animal. The water churned with chaos, sand rising in clouds, bubbles bursting in all directions. Mark's pain was overwhelming, but he kept struggling, his training pushing him to fight for survival. His leg burned with deep lacerations as the shark continued its assault. For long, agonizing moments, the predator held on, refusing to release. The struggle raged beneath the surface as the predator twisted violently, its powerful tail whipping through the water. Mark's body jolted with every movement, streams of red clouding around him. His teammates did not stop, striking again and again with poles and tools, their bubbles rising fast in the dark water. The noise filled the reef, echoing in bursts that finally began to push the predator away. With a sudden wrench, the jaws opened and the enormous form drifted back into the gloom. Mark floated in shock, his body limp as his leg throbbed with searing pain. The wetsuit around his thigh and calf was shredded, long tears exposing deep wounds. His regulator hissed loudly as his breath came fast and uneven. The closest diver grabbed hold of his harness, signaling to the others that it was time to surface. Together they formed a protective circle, keeping eyes on the shadows below as they slowly ascended through the churning water. The ascent was tense. Every flicker in the haze felt like another approach. Every swirl of sand carried the fear that the predator might return. The divers kept close, their movements careful but steady. When they finally broke the surface, the team shouted for support, alerting the boat above. Within moments, strong arms hauled Mark out of the sea. Blood streamed across the deck as he collapsed, his face pale, but his eyes open. Emergency kits were rushed out and fabric was pressed hard against his injuries to slow the bleeding. The wounds were deep, jagged lacerations running along muscle and skin, but he was alive. His teammates stood over him, drenched and shaking from the encounter, their faces marked by exhaustion and disbelief. The boat sped toward shore, cutting through the waves with urgency as radios called ahead for medical teams. At the harbor, paramedics were waiting. Mark was lifted onto a stretcher, his body trembling as bandages soaked quickly with blood. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where surgeons worked for hours to close the wounds and repair damaged tissue. Despite the severity of his injuries, doctors confirmed that he would survive. His training, his teammates' actions, and the quick response of the rescue crew had saved his life. News of the incident spread quickly across Maui and beyond. Reports highlighted the risks faced by police divers who carried out missions in unpredictable conditions. Experts noted that tiger sharks are highly opportunistic, and underwater operations with tools and vibrations can trigger their curiosity or aggression. Officials reminded diving teams to remain alert and to adapt safety measures whenever working near reefs known for large predators. For Mark, recovery would be a long and difficult process. His leg bore deep scars, and the memory of that morning haunted him even more than the pain. The image of the striped predator, its jaws clamped on his body, remained vivid in his mind. Yet his survival stood as a testament to teamwork and resilience. For his colleagues, the encounter served as a poignant reminder of the risks they faced in their duty and of the fragile line between safety and disaster in the ocean's depths. On August 9, 2024, the waters off Mauritius shimmered under the midday sun as a group of 8 tourists set sail on a catamaran excursion. Among them was Thomas Keller, a 41-year-old German traveler who had long dreamed of exploring the Indian Ocean. A seasoned adventurer, Thomas had spent years climbing mountains in Europe and hiking trails across South America, but he had always been drawn to the sea. He often traveled with small groups seeking experiences that pushed him beyond his comfort zone, and this trip was meant to be one more memory in his growing list of adventures. The catamaran carried both seasoned sailors and newcomers, with laughter and conversation filling the air as the vessel cut across the waves. The turquoise waters sparkled, and for most of the passengers, the day seemed perfect. Thomas leaned on the railing, soaking in the wide horizon, grateful for the chance to witness the raw beauty of Mauritius from the sea. The group included couples, friends, and solo travelers, all united by the thrill of sailing across open water. By afternoon, the weather began to shift. The once gentle winds grew sharp, sending ripples across the surface. The crew attempted to adjust the sails, but the gusts strengthened with alarming speed. Within minutes, the catamaran tilted sharply under the force. Shouts filled the air as the vessel heaved again, and then, in a violent surge, it overturned. Wood, gear, and supplies were scattered across the surface as the tourists plunged into the sea. The survivors clung desperately to floating debris and life jackets. The waves tossed them in every direction, pulling them away from the overturned hull. Panic set in as they tried to regroup, their voices breaking through the wind and water. Thomas gripped a broken plank, his heart racing as he was determined to stay afloat until help arrived. Then the surface broke with a sight that sent fear surging through every survivor. Dark dorsal fins cut across the waves. Oceanic whitetips, known for their persistence in open water, had been drawn by the splashing and the traces of blood from cuts and scrapes. The sharks circled closer, their sleek forms moving just beneath the surface. The first strike came without warning. One of the predators lunged at a man gripping a life jacket, its jaws locking onto his arm. He was yanked beneath the surface in a violent thrash, water foaming red as he kicked frantically. For an agonizing moment it seemed he would not reappear, but then he broke free, gasping, his arm torn and bleeding. Another predator struck at floating debris, ramming it hard enough to knock one survivor into deeper water. Screams echoed across the waves as the group thrashed, pulling one another back toward anything that floated. The circling fins only grew closer, cutting through the chaos with chilling patience. The fins carved tight circles around the scattered tourists, each pass drawing closer. The man who had been bitten clutched his torn arm against his chest, his face pale as waves carried him toward the others. Blood trailed from his wounds, staining the water and keeping the predators fixed on the group. Every splash seemed to pull the sharks back in, their blunt heads cutting through foam before disappearing again into the depths. One of the survivors was struck by a sudden surge as another predator rammed a broken piece of wood, flipping it aside. A woman who had clung to it was thrown into open water, her body spinning as she kicked desperately. The group shouted in panic, their arms stretching to pull her back before the sharks closed in. She managed to grab hold of a floating cushion, her breathing ragged as she pressed herself against it. For nearly 20 minutes, the animals circled without rest. They brushed against legs, bumped debris, and made sudden lunges that sent fear surging through the group. Thomas held tight to his plank, his muscles burning from exhaustion. Each second felt stretched as if time itself had slowed, while the fins cut patterns around them with relentless patience. The survivors moved together, trying to form a loose cluster, knowing that straying even a few feet from the group could draw the predators closer. The sea became a mix of foam, shouts, and the sharp glint of dorsal fins rising and falling. Some of the sharks snapped at objects floating near the survivors, tearing at straps and splinters, their teeth shredding anything they could clamp onto. Each strike brought a new rush of fear as the group braced for another attack. Rescue finally came when nearby motorboats, alerted by distress signals, closed in on the scene. Crew members leaned over the sides, striking the water with poles and paddles to drive the predators back. Engines roared, sending vibrations through the sea that broke the rhythm of the circling fins. One by one, the survivors were hauled aboard, their bodies battered, bruised, and bleeding from cuts. The man who had been bitten was lifted carefully, his arm wrapped tight in cloth to slow the bleeding. When the last survivor was pulled onto the deck, the crew wasted no time turning away from the sight. The slick of blood trailed behind them as the fins faded back into the open sea, the animals unwilling to follow once the noise and motion of the boats dominated the surface. The passengers collapsed onto the floor, their limbs shaking from cold, exhaustion, and shock. Doctors later treated deep cuts, bruising, and torn skin from both the bite and the scrapes caused by debris. No one had been killed, but the physical and emotional toll was immense. Experts explained that oceanic whitetips are highly opportunistic, and in cases of shipwrecks or overturned boats, they are among the most dangerous species because of their persistence. For the 8 who endured that afternoon, The memory of fins slicing around them in endless circles would remain long after their bodies had healed. The coastal waters off Santa Barbara, California, had always been a playground for thrill seekers. But on September 1st, 2025, those pristine waves nearly became a graveyard. The area, known for its consistent offshore winds and relatively calm morning conditions, had become increasingly popular among extreme sports enthusiasts. Local marine biologists had noted an uptick in seal populations along the nearby Channel Islands, which inevitably drew larger predators closer to shore during the late summer months. Ethan Walker, a 29-year-old aerospace engineer from San Diego, had been perfecting his jetpack techniques for nearly 3 years. His companions that morning were equally experienced. Lila Morgan, a 26-year-old stunt coordinator from Los Angeles, and Tyler Chen, a 31-year-old former Navy pilot turned extreme sports instructor. The trio had planned their session for dawn, when tourist boat traffic remained minimal, and wind conditions provided optimal stability for their aerial maneuvers. Walker had invested considerable time researching the perfect location for their most ambitious routine yet. The plan involved synchronized barrel rolls, water-skimming passes, and formation flying that would push their equipment to its limits. Each rider carried military-grade jetpacks capable of sustained flight for up to 12 minutes, with emergency flotation systems and GPS tracking devices as safety measures. The morning began flawlessly. Morgan executed a series of tight spirals approximately 15 feet above the water's surface, her jetpack's exhaust creating small steam clouds as it interacted with the cool ocean air. Chen demonstrated his signature move, diving to within inches of the waves before pulling up sharply in a vertical climb. Walker focused on maintaining formation while recording their stunts with a helmet-mounted camera system. 23 minutes into their session, Chen attempted his most challenging maneuver, a double-spin dive that would take him directly through the jetpack wash of his companions. He initiated the rotation at 40 feet altitude, building momentum as he descended. The mathematical precision required for such a stunt left little margin for error, and Chen had practiced the timing countless times in simulators. However, a minor turbulence pocket created by Walker's jetpack exhaust disrupted Chen's stabilization system mid-spin. His gyroscope readings fluctuated wildly as he fought to regain control, but the centrifugal force had already committed him to the descent trajectory. Chen managed to activate his emergency stabilizers, but the correction came too late. He struck the water's surface at approximately 30 miles per hour. His jetpack's thrust immediately cut by the impact sensors. The saltwater was surprisingly cold for early September, and Chen found himself momentarily disoriented as his life vest automatically inflated. His jetpack, now waterlogged and useless, dragged him down briefly before the emergency release mechanism activated. He surfaced sputtering approximately 60 yards from shore, while Walker and Morgan circled overhead, shouting instructions about swimming toward the beach. What none of them noticed was the massive shadow gliding through the deeper water beyond the kelp beds. The great white shark measured approximately 15 feet in length and weighed close to 3,000 pounds. It had been tracking a wounded sea lion for the better part of an hour when the sudden disturbance above caught its attention. The predator's electroreceptors detected Chen's elevated heart rate and the unusual electromagnetic signatures from the waterlogged jetpack equipment. Chen had managed to swim roughly 20 yards toward shore when he felt something brush against his legs. Initially dismissing it as kelp, he continued his steady stroke pattern while calling out to his companions that he was uninjured. Walker and Morgan had descended to approximately 10 feet above the water, preparing to attempt a rescue maneuver they had practiced, but never executed in real conditions. The shark struck with devastating speed and precision. Chen's world exploded into chaos as massive jaws clamped around both his legs just above the knees. The initial bite pressure, estimated later at over 4,000 pounds per square inch, crushed through his wetsuit material and into flesh. The shark's serrated teeth, each measuring up to 3 inches in length, penetrated deep tissue as the predator began its characteristic thrashing motion designed to disorient and weaken prey. Walker and Morgan watched in horror as their friend disappeared beneath a churning mass of white water and blood. Morgan immediately descended to water level, using her jetpack's downward thrust to create maximum splash and noise. Walker circled frantically, shouting tactical instructions while trying to position himself for a potential rescue attempt. Underwater, Chen fought against primal terror as the shark dragged him deeper. The predator's dead black eyes, each the size of a tennis ball, stared at him with ancient hunger. Chen managed to grab the shark's snout with both hands, pushing upward while kicking with his injured legs. The pain was extraordinary, but adrenaline provided temporary strength. Walker made a split-second decision that would later be called either incredibly brave or completely reckless. He shut down his jetpack and dropped directly into the water beside the attack site, carrying the pack's metal stabilizer bar as an improvised weapon. The bar, designed to prevent equipment damage during hard landings, measured 3 feet in length and weighed 12 pounds. As Chen and the shark breached the surface in a violent spray of foam and blood, Walker drove the stabilizer bar directly into the predator's gill slits. The shark's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Chen to break free and swim desperately toward Morgan, who had positioned herself as close to the water as her hovering jetpack would allow. The great white circled once, its primitive brain processing this unusual encounter. Walker continued striking at the water with his improvised weapon while Morgan created maximum surface disturbance with her jetpack's thrust. After what felt like hours but lasted perhaps 90 seconds, the shark's dorsal fin disappeared into deeper water. Coast Guard rescue boats, alerted by the GPS emergency signals from their equipment, arrived within 12 minutes. Chen was airlifted to a trauma center with severe lacerations to both legs, substantial blood loss, and symptoms of shock. Walker suffered minor cuts from debris, while Morgan escaped physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. Marine biologists later confirmed that great white shark activity had increased dramatically along the California coast that week, with multiple sightings reported from Monterey to San Diego. Experts theorized that unusual water temperatures and abundant prey had drawn larger predators closer to shore than typically observed. All 3 riders survived the encounter, though Chen required extensive reconstructive surgery and months of rehabilitation. The incident prompted new safety protocols for extreme water sports, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and emergency response training. Walker and Morgan never flew together again, each pursuing safer hobbies far from the ocean's unpredictable. The remote coral formations off the coast of Palawan, Philippines, had remained largely unexplored by commercial diving operations as of September 2024. These pristine reefs, located nearly 40 kilometers from the nearest fishing village, harbored some of the most diverse marine ecosystems in Southeast Asia. The area's isolation meant that large predators still patrolled these waters with minimal human interference, creating an environment where ancient hunting patterns remained undisturbed. Ramon del Rosario, a 33-year-old spearfishing guide from Manila, had built his reputation on accessing fishing grounds that other guides considered too remote or dangerous. His clients paid premium rates for the opportunity to hunt in waters where massive groupers and other trophy fish remained abundant. Del Rosario's expertise in nighttime spearfishing set him apart from conventional guides, as he understood that certain species became more accessible under the cover of darkness. The expedition that brought Del Rosario to these waters involved a wealthy businessman seeking to land a record-sized grouper. The client had specifically requested a midnight dive, having researched reports that suggested the largest specimens emerged from deep reef caves only during nighttime hours. Del Rosario had agreed to the unusual timing, despite his general preference for dawn hunting sessions. Del Rosario descended alone into the inky water at approximately 11:47 p.m., carrying only a high-powered dive light, his custom spear gun, and 40 minutes of air supply. His strategy involved locating the deep reef caves where large groupers typically sheltered, then using his light to disorient the fish long enough to achieve a clean kill shot. The technique required exceptional diving skills and intimate knowledge of fish behavior patterns. The water temperature at 30 feet depth measured 28 degrees Celsius, with virtually no current and unlimited visibility within his light beam's range. Del Rosario had identified a promising cave formation during his afternoon reconnaissance dive, noting signs of large fish activity, including disturbed sediment and territorial markings on the coral surfaces. 43 minutes into his dive, Del Rosario located his target. A massive Queensland grouper, weighing an estimated 120 pounds, hovered motionless near the cave entrance. The fish appeared unaware of his presence as he maneuvered into position for the killing shot. Del Rosario steadied his breathing and aligned his spear gun's sight with the grouper's vital area behind the gills. The spear struck perfectly, penetrating deep into the fish's body cavity. The wounded grouper immediately began its death throes, thrashing violently while blood dispersed through the water column. Del Rosario secured his catch line and began the process of subduing the massive fish, a procedure that typically required several minutes of careful handling to prevent equipment damage or injury. The hammerhead shark detected the disturbance from approximately 200 meters away, The 10-foot predator had been patrolling the reef's outer edge when Del Rosario's dive light and the grouper's death struggle triggered its hunting instincts. Hammerheads possessed exceptional sensory capabilities in low-light conditions, and the combination of electromagnetic signatures from the dive equipment and chemical traces from the wounded fish created an irresistible stimulus. Del Rosario was focused entirely on securing his catch when the shark's distinctive silhouette entered his light beam. The hammerhead's bizarre head structure, with eyes positioned at the extreme ends of its flattened skull, gave it an almost alien appearance in the artificial illumination. The predator approached with the confident movements of an apex hunter that had encountered no significant threats in these waters. The attack occurred without warning as Del Rosario attempted to swim toward the surface with his prize. The hammerhead struck from his blind spot, its jaws clamping around his shoulder and the upper portion of his diving vest. The impact knocked Del Rosario sideways into the coral formation, his dive light spinning wildly and creating disorienting flashes of illumination. The shark's teeth, though smaller than those of other species, proved devastatingly effective at penetrating diving equipment. Del Rosario felt his vest's inflation system rupture as the hammerhead shook him violently from side to side. His spear gun was torn from his grasp along with the prize grouper that had attracted the predator initially. Del Rosario fought back using the only weapons available, his dive knife and his remaining physical strength. He managed to strike the shark multiple times across its sensitive snout area, while simultaneously kicking against the coral to prevent being dragged into deeper water. The hammerhead's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Del Rosario to break free from its jaws. However, the predator's hunting instincts remained fully engaged. The hammerhead circled repeatedly in the narrow confines of the reef formation, its movements becoming increasingly agitated as it attempted to relocate its escaped prey. Del Rosario's dive light, still functioning despite the attack, created moving shadows that seemed to confuse the shark's navigation systems. After nearly 3 minutes of cat-and-mouse maneuvering through the coral maze, the hammerhead finally retreated into the open water beyond the reef. Del Rosario surfaced immediately, his emergency whistle creating piercing signals that carried across the calm night air. His support boat crew, who had been monitoring his dive schedule, reached his position within 8 minutes. Del Rosario survived the encounter with severe lacerations to his shoulder and upper arm, requiring immediate evacuation to a hospital in Puerto Princesa. Local authorities later confirmed multiple hammerhead sightings in the area throughout September 2019, suggesting that seasonal feeding patterns had drawn these normally deep-water predators into shallower reef environments. The incident effectively ended Del Rosario's career as a spearfishing guide, though he recovered fully from his injuries. He subsequently established a diving safety training program emphasizing the unique risks associated with nighttime spearfishing in predator-rich waters. The attack remains one of the few documented hammerhead encounters with recreational divers in Philippine waters.